Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our session on unlocking urban mangroves for resilience. On behalf of the organizing team, we extend a warm thank you for joining us today as we explore one of the most powerful allies in building resilient cities, which is urban mangroves. As cities grow and climate challenges intensify, the need for sustainable nature-based solutions becomes increasingly urgent. Urban mangroves are often tucked away along coastlines, estuaries, and riverbanks, and they offer a wealth of ecological, social, and economic benefits. Today's session is designed to be both insightful and collaborative. We hope this session sparks new conversations, strengthens partnerships, and ultimately leads to positive actions for our cities. We'll begin with a presentation on the Mangrove Coalition project by Aaron Patel and Dr. Priya Narayanan, followed by an interesting panel on unlocking urban mangroves for resilience. I would now like to pass on the mic to Aaron. Aaron joins us as the Climate and Conservation Advisor for the Godrej Enterprises Group. Over to you, Aaron.
So, what did you say this?
Sure, Monchi. Thanks so much, Pratna, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be here with all of you. So, when we think about these liminal spaces that exist at the borders between rivers, estuaries, and the sea, there's such a range of possibilities that come to mind. Even in a mega city like Mumbai, there's a complex web of wild and wondrous interactions between species like these iconic flamingos that continue to find a winter home, at least in Mumbai. And then beyond that as well, a rich and complex social ecology. Interactions between local communities that depend directly on these mangroves for their livelihoods, and then indirectly for all of us urban residents for whom these serve as resilient living infrastructure, safeguarding our shores against the rising tide. If we think about India's coastline more broadly, mangroves offer so much. They can be seen as an entry point into a mosaic of different coastal ecosystems. Mudflats, tidal marshes, seagrass meadows, and more. This photo in particular showcases the kind of possibilities that we can think of in terms of traditional practices, nature-based solutions in terms of their modern role, and the new technologies that are actually benefiting nature. So for us, in terms of our work on the Mangrove Coalition, we feel there's an imperative in particular to think about the continuum from a climate change standpoint across some of the mitigation considerations and adaptation considerations. From the standpoint of climate change mitigation, we all know, of course, that mangroves are climate warriors. They have these superpowers in terms of their ability to remove and sequester carbon, often per unit area up to 4 times or 5 times as effectively as terrestrial forests. And then from an adaptation standpoint, their role in terms of offering buffers against storm surges, the likes of which we're seeing more frequently, are of both global and local significance. So at a global level, there's a landmark study that showed that there's about $65 billion annually that is averted losses due to mangroves being in place. At the India level, that number is about $8 billion, with in the range of 4 million people, or 3 million people protected each year. Mumbai alone is about 150,000 people who are protected from intense flooding because of mangroves. You can see the Bandra Worli Sea Link and Bandra neighborhood in the background there. In Mumbai, we have mangroves on both coasts, west and east coasts. But then beyond that as well, there are the biodiversity benefits that I mentioned earlier, and there's the livelihood benefits for a number of people who live in close proximity to these ecosystems. So if we think about mangroves and why now, this is a unique moment of both headwinds and tailwinds. In terms of the headwinds, we all know that truly unsustainable development practices, anthropogenic pressures due to prioritizing grey infrastructure over the kinds of blue and green infrastructure that we need to protect and bring back are what we're seeing in vogue these days. And then indirectly, we know that our role, our lifestyles contributing to climate change are leading to the kinds of storms that are battering these ecosystems and dampening their resilience. But at the same time, there are some promising possibilities which we'll perhaps delve into during the course of the panel. One of which is the fact that at the union government level, we have a number of different schemes that are coming about. There's the Mission Amrit Dharohar, there's the Mishti scheme, all of which provide opportunities for engagement on these ecosystems. And then for us, given that we're working in Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, there are tailwinds at the subnational level, which I think are particularly interesting as well. So how does all of this come together? Our vision is to enhance the protection and management of urban mangrove ecosystems in India by incorporating an interdisciplinary, integrated, and inclusive approach. It's 3:25 p.m. Into Connect Karo. I'm sure you've heard a whole number of different jargon and frameworks and stuff like that. So let me break it down in terms of what that actually means, right? Our three key pillars of engagement. One is natural capital, which we'll spend a little bit more time on in the panel, delving into trade-off thinking. Let's put a dollar or biophysical value on different ecosystem services so that we're not undervaluing the role of nature. The second is community stewardship. Long may us leave behind the legacy of fortress-style conservation. We have an intact, pristine ecosystem here and communities that are resettled and pushed to the margins there. We have to be thinking about community stewardship in our cities and more broadly. And the third really vital piece of our work is how do we think about ecological health along with citizen science? How can we activate awe and wonder as ways to kind of deepen our connections with these ecosystems and at the same time understand more about actually what's going on in our rapidly changing world? So one of the unique things about this coalition is the range of incredible partners that we have. It's anchored by the Sunabai Pirojsha Godrej Foundation. We have, of course, WRI as our partners. We have WWF, from whom we'll hear during the panel discussion. We have the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in Chennai, TIS in Mumbai, the Natural Capital Project at Stanford, and Conservation International, each of whom brings a unique and diverse viewpoint to our work and a range of different strengths and expertise that we're leveraging for these efforts. We've also been incredibly patient in terms of how we've gone about aligning our different organizational approaches to now leave us poised for a lot of deeper engagement and impact. So I'm going to leave you with this visual. Apologies if the one on the right is not particularly clearly visible. One could think that this is a tale of two cities. On the left, the Vikhroli mangroves in Mumbai with the eastern suburbs in the background. Truly unique example of an other effective area-based conservation measure. Also a unique intergenerational story of commitment to conservation by the Godrej family. On the right, we have the Ennore Creek in Chennai, which the naturalist and writer Yuvan Avies describes as the sacrifice zone of the city. Unfortunately, many of our cities have these sacrifice zones. Here, in the case of Chennai, we have thermal power plants, we have chemicals factories. The Kosastalaya River is basically, choking and just about making it to the sea. But the reality is far more complex than, just thinking of this as a tale of two cities. And my colleague Priya from WRI is going to delve further into the different types of dependencies, the different types of uses of these ecosystems in these two cities. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Aaron. I'll just probably jump direct into what really our approach as a coalition to these, situations or cities has been. Really, we want to understand and strengthen the link between people and nature, which is fundamental to what we're trying to achieve as a coalition. How are we really going to ensure in a very hybrid, hyper urban environment like a Mumbai and Chennai, how do people and nature kind of coexist, survive, and how can we then bring opportunities for positive transformation for both people and nature? And also the biggest aspect of this entire work and the coalition is going to be to identify gaps in the regulations, identify gaps in existing land and water policies, and what is it that through the coalition we can give recommendation or policy guidance or inform cities and the state really to understand and embed the mangrove as an important ecosystem within an urban sphere. So just you would see in this visual between where we put people and nature on one of the two grids. So on the extreme left, you see a land sharing in conflict. So that particular image is from the Trombay Cheetah Camp area, which is near the M East Ward in Mumbai. So essentially, land is the limited resource there, and how with every inch of growing mangroves, the low-income neighborhoods are losing land. And of course, it's not the land that they own historically, but it's the land that they've been living, over 50 odd years. So how are we going to really understand and solve this complex problem of land sharing and conflict in a very hyper, urban environment? And then the second image is about the health and quality of life. So the Deonar dumping ground is where there is also chemical incineration, the waste from chemical incinerators coming in. So that's the location where there's mangroves on one side, and again, there's low-income neighborhoods on the other side. So how are we going to model, or how are we going to put out this understanding of people and nature, and putting people's stewardship as an important aspect to really turn around and try to give, suggestions or recommendations at the policy level? And then on the right are two images that talk about sustainable use and management, because we also know that a lot of these ecosystem people are dependent on, right? So either for fishing or smaller, rounds of ecotourism. So that's the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary, the sustainable use and management. So there's really potential to, coexist and co-derive this understanding of tourism with nature, and how do you kind of respect and live together. And then finally, there are places where we do understand the ecological integrity kind of takes the big seat, and how we really need to maintain this ecosystem to then solve some of the things that Aaron showed in the beginning in terms of coastal resilience, sequestration potential, and a lot of other climate resilience that the mangrove offers. So between these two pillars, like people, where stewardship of people becomes more important, to really ecosystem services that nature provides. So our entire spectrum of locations within the Mangrove Coalition is between this, and our work is also centered around trying to understand and provide very location-based recommendations for these different typologies of problems that we really are going to tackle. And this is again a snapshot of how this particular ecosystem is already providing a lot of services for the community, because most of the sewage dump comes here, but a lot of estuarian influx happens. A lot of clearing is automatically happen, while the sewage is also not a treated sewage that really comes into this creek. So, but nature is performing its role, and then we are trying to really bring in 4 or 5 things. So we are scoping with intense stakeholder engagement. We are trying to really build evidence, trying to understand what are the development impacts on the health of mangrove ecosystem, what are the development impacts, climate and development impacts of people living near the mangrove ecosystem, and trying to also get a shared understanding. So really reflection and insights. And one of the biggest things that we are doing over the last 3-4 months is to go to the field and understand how people have lived with mangroves in the past, what it is to like to live with mangroves now, and what has really changed in terms of their just their impressions of living very close to a mangrove ecosystem. And then trying to really vision with multiple stakeholders, because Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra both in their state mandates have like big push towards conservation, restoration and management of mangroves. How do we really vision along with people and the government to really inform some policies and give recommendations at the state and the city level? So, but this is all a little big in terms of the big picture, but the most important thing for us here is to really look at reflections from the ground. And one of the bigger additions that we have with colleagues from WWF is the mangrove health assessment. So we really look into an area, understand the hydrology, understand the health status of mangroves, water quality, biodiversity, what are the ecosystem services that's provided, and what really is the governance behind establishing this health assessment. So this is in progress. The draft framework for the health assessment has already been done, and we are hoping to put it out in the public domain soon. And what this really helps us do is to understand the mangrove health, and engage with stakeholders, to involve them in field testing, validate mangrove health, establish baselines, engage with national and the state stakeholders to really disseminate about the health of mangroves within the urban area, and then prepare this annual health, mangrove health cards. So this becomes really important, because right now the government is pushing a lot on conservation of mangroves, but really how do you understand and know the baseline of what really is the ecosystem health, and where are we aiming to go towards? So this is a very big part where our partners WWF are putting out the health card. And these are just bits of what we've started to do on the project, but just reflection and insights from the site visits in Mumbai and Chennai. I'll just run through very quickly because this really is the crux of what the project is all about. So, like I said, I think the image is a little blurred, sorry. So, this is about the tourism and fishing village in Thane Creek estuary. So, where the local fishing community is heavily dependent on this creek for, their day-to-day activities and for fishing and a little bit of tourism. One of the things that's happening, which is not visible to us because it's all beautiful mangroves, is that the mangroves are very close to terrestrial ecosystems. That means the land ecosystem and the mangrove ecosystem is very close and they're encroaching upon each other. So which really is not benefiting even the ecosystem while it's green on paper and visibly in the photograph, but just on the ground, this is not one of the best ways how an ecosystem can thrive because it's very close and very intertwined. So these are some of the issues that we are dealing with on ground. Of course, this is the Trombay cheetah camp, which I showed earlier as well. So those are the low-income vulnerable household, and these are the mangroves. And with every mangrove growth, I think there's a push in with the forest department or other departments who maintain the mangrove to really move the people away from where they are living. So this is, I think, coming back to Dr. Amita's comment this morning in terms of inclusivity, right? So and spatial justice, right? This is it. So because the land is a very limited resource, how do we then really bring spatial justice to nature and people? So we're still, in terms of just understanding the processes there and what are people really, enduring on a very day-to-day basis. So again, images from Mandla. And these are images from Ennore, so where we did site visits and interacted with the fishing communities to understand. So Ennore, I think, it was also called as slow Bhopal because apparently that's the level of which there is, chemical poisoning that's going on into the Kosisthalia river and into the ocean as well. So the village folks have been here for close to 60 odd years, and the water's black, so there's a lot of oil which is always floating, and there's absolutely no ecosystem in the water. There are no fishes, no crabs, there's nothing in the water, so there is no livelihood that can be, there's no dependency on the water at all while it's hardly like 100 meters away from their houses. So how are they really, trying to rebuild their lives, rebuild their everyday living, and because they're depending on the fishing fishing was their most important livelihood. So how are they kind of reshifting from fishing to something else? And what is it that we as a coalition can really bring in terms of recommendation? And what are the other livelihood opportunities that can really emerge in terms of, in terms of the fishing community there? So this is the thermal power plant. So this is a non-negotiable because this kind of is the bigger grid for the entire state. And just pictures of the mangrove, location. And this is fine. I'll stop here. So this is the last slide where we're talking about the covalent mangroves, where there are these dense mangroves and very close urban space to the mangroves. So this is a developing area where the high-income households are very close to the mangrove. So this model is going to help us understand how we can, one part of the community is going to be low-income groups, but there also be high-income groups whom we are going to work with to really bring about and develop a model for co-living with nature and, mangroves and us. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. But I'd also probably take this opportunity to invite our esteemed speakers to the stage. I would request Ms. Nairika Holkar, Executive Director, Godrej Enterprises Group. Please welcome Nairika. Dr. Sejal Vora, Program Director, WWF. Welcome, Dr. Sejal. Madhav, CEO, WRI India. Arun Patel, Climate and Conservation Advisor, Godrej Enterprises Group. And Vivek Venkatramani, Associate Program Director, Climate Resilience Practice, WRI India. Thank you. Over to you, Madhav. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arun and Priya, for setting the context for this conversation. And some apologies about this more UN style sort of conference room. A lot of others are not like this, but I think we'll manage to keep it informal in spite of having a space like this. So I think to a large extent, I think the presentations have set the context for the ambition, right? Is to really protect and unlock these urban mangroves for resilience. And but at the same time, we've also seen how difficult some of these problems look like. So I think in this context, I think to a large extent, this conversation is for us to see how we can realistically achieve this ambition and what are the things that we need to do. So to just kick off this conversation, maybe we'll start with you, Nairika. I mean, we saw the Vikhroli mangroves. I mean, these are, it's just a leading example of how this has been done. I've had the opportunity to visit. I was told that the height of some of the trees are probably the highest in the world now because they've grown to this height. And so we know that protecting some of these spaces for a short period of time can really allow them to rejuvenate and recover. But would love to hear from you what your learning has been from conserving, managing these Vikhroli mangroves for so many years. And over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Madhav. No, I think it's been something that the family has, over the generations felt very strongly about. And it, I think, started with my uncle Sorab, who was, really passionate about mangroves. And I think at that time, there was very little understanding of the ecosystem benefits or, anything around mangrove conservation. And I think over the last 45 years, it's been a constant, I think, tussle with the government, and also in a city like Bombay, where you have so many competing land use, such high population density, and also competing concerns that somewhere environment takes a sort of a sidestep, a backseat, and kind of keep our endeavor has been to try to keep it front and center. And we were also, discussing earlier today about, conventions like Ramsar that are envisioned to protect the environment, and how they've been implemented, in the country today. And do we really need to look at strengthening some of these? Because if they don't have the ability, then just having the nomenclature is not really helpful. So I think the challenge and opportunity has been very focused on community, spreading awareness on. I think also the wonder that mangroves have in terms of biodiversity, and along with WWF, a lot of work over the last several years on, really bringing about wonder and having community stewards to really do the speaking, and also to be the ones who are involved. And I think local communities who are benefiting, how do we engage them to, a higher level in terms of them then taking this on. And when we started this project, was speaking to my uncle Jamshid, and he said, you can't really take this as a test case for, because we said we want to focus on urban India and look at it there, because the concerns and tensions are very real there. And so he said, but it doesn't make sense then to look at Vikhroli, because it's a ecosystem that, in a sense, can't be easily replicated. And so, the idea should be to look further and look at other examples to really kind of bring this tension more to life. It's not that it doesn't exist there, but maybe it's been easier in a way to protect it because it was a contained space. So therefore now kind of looking at different ecosystems around India and taking two specific examples as a starting point. I think Aaron touched upon, the whole Ennore Creek and how much development has happened, has impacted, the ecological situation there. That it's important to also have examples of restoration where it's possible to be test cases in maybe more strained environments.
Oh, that's great. And I think, it's hats off for doing this, because we were just sharing some research that 60%, like most of the urban growth in the last 10 years in the top 10 cities, 40% of that growth has been on basically zones that have high or very high water recharge potential. So to be able to hold on to a piece of land and to protect it and to nurture it, I think is a big achievement given the pressures that exists. And so congratulations on that. And over to you, Sejal. Based on WWF's work on mangrove and wetlands ecosystem, what are the challenges and learnings that we can build on? You've been doing this for a long time. What lessons can we bring to really advance this conversation?
Thanks. I think, to start with, I think the single most difficult thing is the fact that we've chosen urban mangroves. If you look at there's been a lot of, I don't want to put it very crudely, but a lot of claiming of success in terms of mangrove restoration across the country. You will find figures that are basically saying that mangrove cover is going up, which is a very nice and positive thing in a place where we mostly hear bad news. But if you delve a little bit deeper into that statistic, then you start finding, lots of gaps in it in terms of what were the species, which was the area, how was it done, how inclusive, where's it going? So there are all these questions that appear. So I think in terms of challenges, the single biggest challenge is that urban mangroves face a very different set of challenges than in rural areas, right? The first one just being the real estate value of this mangrove. So you're up against a massive challenge and you're fighting against a force which you don't find in other places. So I'm not sure actually how replicable some of the models that we have done in rural India and other parts of India would be to the urban mangrove challenge. Actually, that is also part of the reason why we are so excited to be a part of this initiative, because, it's the elephant in the room. We tend to not tackle the whole issue of urban mangroves because it's way too complex and way too challenging. And so for too long, we've been kind of turning away from it. And as a result, I think over the years, we've been losing a lot of urban mangroves. So I think, as I think Aaron, you said, and I think the time is right. If we don't tackle this challenge now, it may be too late for urban mangroves, except of course for the ones that are protected by the Godreges and others. Others will be up for grabs. So I think for us, the first and most important challenge and lesson is to turn the narrative around. Is somehow we have to turn the narrative around from mangroves just being seen as locked up land, as incredibly precious resource, which is actually going to be critical in your economic development. So for urban areas, which are actually lucky enough to still have patches of mangroves, I think any city that does not recognize this and sacrifices those mangroves is going to pay a very high price. So I think if that narrative, we can start turning it around to say, look, to start with, these are really important. Then we can talk about the science, the research, how you do it, what you do, etc. is all something that comes after there is acceptance that this is a really important ecosystem to protect. So to my mind, we need to spend enough energy, not just on the research and stuff, but making the case. So we need to make that case, because unless we do that, decision makers will not. And those decision makers will vary. They may vary from the government to even local communities. And it's very interesting when you hear what was just presented, which is to say that in many cases, local communities actually don't want mangroves to increase, right? Because they see that as encroaching on their livelihoods or on their land. So you're facing this resistance not just from the government, not just from real estate developers, but even from local communities. So that challenge is not going to be a small one. It's going to be enormous. So that's my sense, is that let's first really make a strong case, get the buy-in, and that's why the whole citizen engagement piece is so important. It's not just a fun or frivolous exercise. It is critical in building that level of support, because without that support, we will be fighting a losing battle.
Just a couple of sort of follow-up thoughts from you. One, I think, do you think having something like the flamingo becomes a good marker, and there's a lot of experience in any reflections from that idea? And then the other thing is, I think, coastal resilience. One of the things we work a lot with, say, Bombay Municipal Corporation, and flood is something that they are very keen to address, right? There is a lot of pressure on them. And so I think do you think making this link between the flood resilience and the mangroves is a useful thing to sort of work on?
Yeah, so my sense is use every tool in the book, right? So flamingos will appeal to a certain constituency. There are, urban people who love that sort. Flamingos are an attractive bird in any case. So use that for the constituency that appeals to. Use the flood control and the flood management and the economic argument for the constituency that appeals to. Use the livelihoods and, whatever it is, the fishing, etc., to the constituency that appeals to. So my sense is that every constituency, every stakeholder is going to resonate to a different kind of value. So if we can capture all of these different values and somehow put them together so that we're getting this cross-cutting coalition. Otherwise, what happens in a lot of is we have one constituency that's with you, but the others are not. So I think, use whatever argument appeals to whichever constituency, but make it into a holistic thing, because at the end of the day, you're going to need support from all of these people. And I just want to add, and maybe we'll do it later, is this idea of the mitras that we started, the Friends of the Mangroves. What makes it very appealing to me is that it cuts across sections of society. It's not limited to just one section of society. It's everything. It's school teachers, it's doctors, it's students, it's communities, it's fisherfolk, and that is the beauty of it. So that's what we need to try and do, is coalesce different sections of society around a common cause. Challenging.
No, I think the coalition of willing. I think most urban problems eventually, which have any political nature or any land, require this, coalition that you need to bring together. So that's absolutely spot on. Vivek, in a way, Vivek works at WRI, but he's been working very closely in Tamil Nadu. So today he's speaking both as a representative of Tamil Nadu, and also maybe share some of our work that we've been doing on climate smart villages in Tamil Nadu. So, Vivek.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Madhav. Okay. I think I'm sort of a bit of an outlier here, because I give a bit of a research perspective to this, and also we do a lot of ground level work in all the projects we do. So I think we've sort of met with a lot of communities, like Priya talked about earlier. We've met with reasonably high income households, a lot of very backward tribal communities. In some cases, they're not tribal communities, but dominant communities, but still socioeconomically backward. And the geographical sort of locations where each of these sites are also very different, like the Kovalam, Ennur, and the Trombay example. We have variety of geographies that we work in. So to give a bit of a context, we work on this flagship program called the Tamil Nadu sort of climate resilient villages program. It's a big program of the Tamil Nadu government, where we're working in 12 districts to develop what they're calling as the model village or the climate resilient village. So there's no absolute target in a sense. It's not to say that we want 100% resilience, because that's not possible. But what we want to achieve is that if they are currently at a particular level of resilience or vulnerability to, let's say, floods, droughts, cyclones, or a multiplicity of those issues, how can we make them less vulnerable going forward? So that's the idea. And across that, we work in several sectors. It could be flood mitigation, drought mitigation, biodiversity conservation, tourism, solar power. We're also looking at setting up new social enterprises to build alternate livelihoods which are resilient to climate impacts, so on and so forth. So each site has a variety of sectors that we are dealing with, depending on what's the requirement at the ground level there. And of the 12 districts, actually at least 6 of them are coastal districts. And in that, I would specifically talk about a couple of them. One is in the Pichavaram, that's the Kadalur district. And Pichavaram is a very well-known tourist spot in Tamil Nadu. It's known for its mangroves. And people go there just for mainly boating, sort of bit of wildlife, birding and all of that. And it's been well promoted over several years. But over the last 3-4 years, there's been a lot of highlight around Pichavaram. So around this Pichavaram actually are where one of our sites is. It's called, it's in a town panchayat called Killai. So it's neither like a gram panchayat nor a municipal corporation. It's in between. So it's more of a peri-urban area. But these colonies that we're working with are of tribal communities called the Irulas. So they are the most backward communities that you can see, and they're basically people who have been living in the sea. But after the tsunami, they've got tsunami households where the houses constructed by the Tamil Nadu government, and these are like almost 20 years old now. So they're in very bad shape in general. So they're basically migrants who have come back into the land after the tsunami. So they don't have land rights, and they're obviously treated as a community which is suppressed by the dominant community which is there. And these are all fishing communities. So the dominant community there actually has people, fishermen who own big boats, multiple boats, and they actually use the Irula community as the labor for it. So they don't have much of rights there in general. Even in terms of water supply, when we look at it, the wards until our site actually has water supply in every house, but in this community there's one tap for the entire village. So that's how bad it is, the situation, right? So, and they're just adjacent to the mangroves itself. So I think multiple speakers have spoken about in the past is about how mangroves conservation can completely encroach into the livelihoods of people, into the land of people. And so the challenge is to sort of understand how do we I think the conservation of mangroves can be successful only when you sort of intertwine the local communities with the conservation agenda itself. Otherwise, they're seen as if there's a siloed approach where it's a government initiative and these are the people there, it's always looked at as forest department versus the other departments. I think that's the challenge we've seen. And in some other sites, for example, there's another district called Tiruvarur where we're also working on mangroves there. And these mangroves haven't been promoted at all. They've not received highlight like the Pichavaram ones, and they're in bad shape. And there's a lot of communal tension there. There's a lot of, sort of Hindu-Muslim issues there. There are a lot of land right issues where ample land is under either a temple or the mosque or the church over there. So actually doing anything in those areas are actually very difficult. And for whatever reason, the mangroves haven't been promoted in a very big way. And now I think the government has taken some steps to come with some initial mangrove conservation there. So they're actually getting the sort of driving the idea that conservation is going to lead to some sort of livelihoods for you, and this is going to be similar irrespective of which community you belong to. That itself is a bit of a challenge over there. So we're also working there. And the other side that I wanted to mention is in Pulicat. That's the northern part of Chennai, which is very close to the Ennore creek that Priya was talking about. There also we have seen that just simply the forest department just wants to start mangrove conservation there, but I think a bit of a miscommunication on what this project intends to do can lead to a lot of protests. So we've seen in our own site actually there's been a lot of protests against doing our project because they think that we're going to be encroaching upon their land. And there are also migrant communities over there. So there's been a halt in our project itself for that site alone. So these are issues that we face a lot. But the one thing that I wanted to highlight is that I think the government has taken significant steps in the last 3-4 years. They have something called a Tamil Nadu Tea and Shore program, or it's the coastal restoration program, which is a mammoth program where the state is focusing on 14 districts, which are predominantly coastal, and they're looking at mangrove conservation as a big agenda of all of those districts, right? And they managed to sort of, I think, I won't go to the numbers because Sejal talked about how that could be dubious, but they've also given their own figures and everything. They've done some restoration and they've engaged tribal communities for doing that. And the interesting thing is that they've also, the agenda of that Tea and Shore program is to create these mangrove mitras. So they are called the mangrove councils. And within those, they have these mangrove mitras, and these are people who are panchayat leaders as well as the community members, women, men. At least so far, they've created this. It's in progress, so it's not something that's been done. But they're including men, women, people from backward communities to be part of these councils, and they get a initial seed funding to set up that council to actually make these micro plans, which are looking at how the mangroves can be conserved, keeping in mind the village, the driver of the economy, their livelihoods, and all of that. And they have a revolving fund, which is to be provided to the Mangrove Council itself to see how it can be used on a flexible basis for various aspects. So that's something that's interesting that's going on. But anyway, the highlight of what I wanted to say was just that we've also worked on mangroves, but we're just facilitators there, we're not implementers. And we worked in both like urban, peri-urban and rural sites. So the different context that we're working in is very different, and the challenges we face are extremely different again, and we've had to sort of adapt to that on a local basis. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Vivek. And I think, I think Priya's presentation also laid out this whole people-nature spectrum. And I think you have, clearly sort of highlighted that, you really have to, get to each of the sites and understand the social sort of challenges as we think about strategies. So I think, again, documenting the learnings from these experiences so that, if there are other places where there are relevant lessons would make absolute sense as we look at sort of more and more context. Coming back to you, Narika, I think two questions, right? One, overall as a business, right? What role does this sort of sustained restoration conservation play? And just also, do your employees sort of identify with this? Is this something that, gives them pride? And so just any reflections and thoughts on that? If we want other companies to start doing, what can we tell them about this whole journey?
No, I think we are very evangelical about mangroves at Godrej. So I think it's also from our school. We have a whole sort of course on it. And even sort of our induction program is around it. We have volunteering opportunities with, different initiatives that we've run with WWF. So internally, there is a lot of momentum, and also we'd like to build awareness because finally our people are also going to be champions. So I think it's a very important part of our ethos. And I think from a more practical, let's say, business perspective, I think it's also the whole idea of business continuity. Because today when you look at, all of the climate related, hazards that are, prevalent, across our cities in India, and having such a, long coastline and vulnerable communities living all around, the benefits of, what mangroves can do to be a buffer, for flood protection, for, many different aspects, also pollution now, which is a growing concern, how mangroves can really play that role of being such an excellent scrubber of carbon, and even, certain myths that people hold about, terrestrial forests and how mangroves are actually, so much more effective at scrubbing carbon than even terrestrial forests. So I think that whole idea of business continuity today is not kind of top of the agenda. It's top of the agenda, but not from a nature-based solutions perspective. And how can one, sort of bring that front and center? So I think that would be probably from a business perspective the most compelling. And I think also today, even if you study a company and you see kind of the balance sheet, and then you see kind of the ESG metrics, they can give a very different view of a company depending on the metrics that you choose. So how does one really have a more holistic understanding of companies is only when you kind of marry the two and see them holistically. So I think that is also an opportunity for companies today, because even, reporting doesn't mandate you to, to look at both aspects together. But I think it's very valuable. And I think also, if one is looking at, the whole ecological impact as well as, going green as something ancillary, actually, when one looks at, business productivity, efficiency, it's actually an enabler of efficiency. So if one can really bake those metrics into, because today if we look at, all our processes, whether they're manufacturing processes or from a product perspective, it's very much integrated into the operating system of the business. It's not something which we look at as separate. And I think it's also helpful to track from that perspective, because finally being green is good for business, and I think that is very important, and can be a compelling reason for businesses to want to take it up.
No, that's, we've been looking at just CSR spending of businesses, and, we're now seeing that close to about 100 crores annually is going to tree planting type of agenda, which is significant. We're also seeing a lot of tech companies essentially starting to invest in these, and it's with the, I think clearly with the intent of carbon offsetting at some point of time. And I think, how do we bring some of these metrics and also probably show why these sort of mangrove ecosystems can also become a important sort of part of that conversation, would be something to also explore.
Because I think also a lot of these tree planting projects, unfortunately, probably 60-70% become unsuccessful because you're not planting the right species in the right location, or you don't. So even having kind of that ecological thought into the planting process itself to make it successful would be, beneficial.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's, bringing the landscape approach and doing it. Yeah, spot. Sejal, I think the mangrove health card idea was, initially shared. Just from your perspective, how important do you think that is as a tool, and how do we really, what are the audiences that we really want to engage with that?
So interesting. We were just having this conversation over lunch, so it's good that you've asked this, because it puts the challenge back in perspective. So there are many ways in which you can use these health cards, right? Starting just from an engagement point of view. So often in WWF particularly, because we started off, as a very people-centric organization, we were very much into education, communication, and people still relate that with us. So often we still get requests for people who want to be involved in the environment, in the cause of the environment. So you keep getting people who want to volunteer, who want internships, who just want to do something. And they feel helpless because there is often no avenue or no channel for people to engage in environmental stuff. You might be a banker, you might be, in the finance sector, but you deeply care about the environment. What is the way for you to engage? So these health cards, in a way, are a way for people to get engaged. It's a starting point, it's an entry point to say, if you care, give some of your time. So first, it's that, just building that constituency. So that's the first value of the cards, I think. It's just to get people involved. The second, of course, is that given the lack of capacity, given also the lack of understanding and the limited knowledge about basics, water health, mangrove health, it's an awareness raising tool. So it's a tool to build your knowledge, build your awareness, build a constituency that is more informed, right? So it becomes an information sharing tool. A third level, I'm just going step by step. So if you go to the third level, then it's also a tool for generating data, right? So it's also generating for you a very important piece of data, which is baselines. A lot of the work that we do in our sector, in the conservation sector, and I'm sure WRI is also, struggling with this particular issue, is how do we measure impact if we don't have baselines? And for a lot of our work, we don't. What this does is it gives you a whole army of people who are actually collecting that baseline, which otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. So it's giving you the real data. The fourth, of course, is if those health cards are repeated and the whole process works well, it becomes an excellent tool for monitoring. Again, something that we sorely lack. So it starts engaging citizens in baseline and monitoring and data collection, data analysis. And then fifth, of course, when you go up the ladder, the ultimate aim is that you create a constituency which cares, is willing to act, and can act as a pressure group. So at the end of the day, if you're involved with something, it's like your child. You've been monitoring the health of your child all the time. You've been looking at what's going up, what's going down. You've been alerting people about it. You've been getting alerts about it. You're invested. So you're invested in that area, or you're invested in that patch of mangrove, or you're invested in the concept of mangrove conservation. Different people will react differently. So I believe that these health cards have multiple purposes. Again, it depends on how you manage it. So this is the challenge on our side. One side is, of course, the people who are involved in collecting the data and helping you. The other side is, how are you processing and feeding this back? Because if you, as the recipient of this information, are not processing it in real time, you're taking 3 years to process it, people are going to lose interest. So you've got to keep the engagement and the interest going, which means real-time feedback. Real-time telling you, hey, you collected this data, we've analyzed it, this is the health of your mangrove. Every 3 months, every 6 months, you're getting a report card. So you're feeling like your efforts are actually leading to something. So I think it works both ways. It has to work at the level of, providing the training, the interest, the capacity at the level of the citizens. But it's also up to you to process and feed this information back and use it sensibly, whether you're using it for policy or whether you're using it just for engagement and building awareness. So I believe that when done right, this is an extremely useful tool. And we've used it in other places where it's worked well. So we're hoping that here as well we'll be able to, engage people and create this kind of, pool of aware and informed citizens.
Thank you. And, a very personal story with when you said nature clubs. But I think the nature clubs idea really, I remember I was in 7th grade and our school used to do a test. And actually I didn't get in 7th grade. So I had to make the extra effort to sort of, So I think these nature clubs also, and working with schools really is also a very, very powerful tool to also start some of these engagements.
And it stays with you, and so I'm a product of the nature clubs as well. One whole generation has been a product of these clubs, and I keep saying that an entire generation of conservation professionals emerged from a very light touch activity. It was not a heavy activity. It was not, in school. It was not exams. It was just being out in nature. And these are similar. These cards, take you out in nature. They invest you, and it's probably something that will stay with you for life. So I think it's a worthwhile investment.
Aran, coming to you, one, I think, you did mention also some of the international partners that are part of the coalition. Can you bring a little bit of this sort of, global sort of ambition around mangroves, and how can, we learn from that, benefit from that? And also then as part of this, we can move to the last round of questions, but also if you can end by talking about your vision of this coalition and, long-term vision of what you think would be success.
Thanks, Madhav. I'm gonna attempt to get you all to visualize something. The first part will be me, stumbling to create building blocks. Imagine if Vivek was to put his name card on top of this. Can you try that, Vivek, for a second? Imagine each of these is a foot, right? That's a little bit more than that's about 3.5 feet, 4 feet. That's what we're looking at in terms of, sea level rise over the course of the century, 3.5 centimeters a decade, all adding up. If we think about what it would take to build our way out of that with physical grey infrastructure, what an impossible challenge we're looking at, right? We have this huge concentration of people living along our coasts, living along our rivers, who are all going to be dealing with this issue of water, right? Too much or too little over the course of the rest of the century. What else apart from mangroves in terms of natural building blocks through vertical depositions of soil every single year can do that as effectively? So if we think about the last 50 years, unfortunately, across the world, we've lost 35% of our mangroves. In terms of what we have left today, there's about 6.23 gigatons of carbon stored in mangroves and accompanying ecosystems. That's double India's annual emissions. That's, maybe just under a sixth, a seventh of global emissions. We can't afford to lose any more. So what we've been dwelling on as a coalition is hyper-local issues and urban issues. And that matters. Mumbai, 20 million people, Chennai, 10, 15 million people we'll see when the census eventually happens. there's the bigger issue, though, apart from hyper-local environmental justice, of what do we do to build larger coalitions of the willing to make sure that we don't lose any more, that we protect what we have, and ideally that we bring back mangroves. That's going to be really, really difficult in these urban ecosystems, but it is possible in many other areas across the planet. According to the Global Mangrove Alliance, and I promise you I won't bore you with any more names of such alliances and alphabet soup of acronyms and so on, the highest potential areas in India, at least, for restoration are in Kutch and in Andhra Pradesh and little pockets of Tamil Nadu. There's so many things that we can be doing to bring these back into our lives and into our livelihoods. So amongst that alphabet soup of acronyms, one of the champions that's building a lot of cohesion between different actors on mangroves is Conservation International. And they're one of our partners in the Mangrove Coalition. And what they're really keen to do is move beyond the usual stories that we've been seeing in the last few years. Often hear about Colombia, you hear about Mexico, you hear about some small pockets of Africa. There hasn't been enough Indian representation on the world stage. What would it look like if at the next, either IPCC COP or IPBES COP, we were fisher folk from Ennore talking about his perspectives on environmental justice, weaving together those global considerations with hyper-local issues of environmental justice? What would it look like to have a really progressive, ambitious secretary of an environment and climate change cell in an Indian state on the world stage talking about what they're doing? There's precedent for this. We had the former Environment Minister of Maharashtra, thanks to many of these global efforts, make a commitment to transfer thousands of hectares of mangrove land from various state-owned companies to the State Forest Department. What could that look like if we ratchet up that ambition? And to Madhav's second question in terms of, what do we see as one of the possibilities for success of this coalition, our efforts here in India? I think we're stuck right now in a planning paradigm that lacks imagination and lacks empathy, and where grey infrastructure is seen as development and blue and green infrastructure is seen as kind of incidental on the margins, pushed to the peripheries. One of the things that we're trying to do through one of the pillars that I mentioned earlier, natural capital, is to quantify the dollar and biophysical value of ecosystem services. So that when we get into scenario planning, imagine for a second, Mumbai and Chennai, there's a high protection scenario. We're not going to lose any more mangroves due to anthropogenic activities. There's a business as usual, chalta hai kind of attitude. Ya chalo transmission line laga de. Let's plan the next bullet train through the mangroves. What are we going to need in the future? Water, desalination plant, let's put that in the mangroves. Or we think of a high grey infrastructure scenario. We need to get into tangible numbers in terms of the value, as Sejal was saying earlier today in a conversation, today of these ecosystem services. Not some distant future, rest of the century sea level rise kind of scenario, because all of these decisions happen in short cycles, electoral cycles or business cycles or whatever they are. We need to be able to understand the value today of these ecosystems so that we can take informed decisions about our future.
Thank you, guys. Sejal, maybe 1-2 lines on the vision, and we'll come like this. We continue.
Gosh, I don't know. Aaron has, so succinctly and beautifully summarized it that I don't have much to add to it. But, if I had to have one vision for the success of this initiative, well, I can never have one. So let me have more than one. So I think 2 or 3 things. One is, of course, the fact that, we formed a coalition. And somebody talked about a coalition of the willing or whatever. I strongly believe that the conservation challenges in India cannot be solved by one organization alone. They require people to come together. Whether you're like-minded or not fully like-minded doesn't matter. There will always be compromises. You will never find, 7 or 8 organizations that are completely aligned. But even if you find that there's alignment in some cases and you're bringing those skills and synergies to bear, then we can demonstrate and prove that there is value in working together. So to me, one of the important outcomes of this needs to be the ability to demonstrate how coalitions work and why coalitions are important in terms of why did we come together. We could have done this. Godrej could have done it on their own. They could have hired 5 high consultancy firms to do it. Why are we going through this process of the coalition. So I think it's very important to demonstrate this. One of the things I've always said, I worked for a long time outside of India, and I worked for a long time in Southeast Asia. And one of the things that always impressed me about the way civil society worked there is how they would come together at the drop of a hat on an issue. So if there was an issue, say a mega dam or whatever it is, 100 organizations would come together and talk in one voice. It's so hard. When I came back to India, it was hard for me to get 3 organizations together, leave alone 100. So I am a great believer in the power of coalition. So that is why I think for me, one of the visions of this project is to make this approach work. The other, of course, is to get not just mangroves, but to get urban resilience, nature-based solutions, and how important they are for the future of not just our cities, but our civilization. To get that somehow, that message strongly reinforced. So in a way, if this project succeeds, then that message also will have been reinforced. And I really believe that somehow we're looking the other way. And we can't go on like this. So I think for me, that's the other important thing. And the third important thing is this whole business of bringing data and science into decision making. So I used to be a scientist. I don't call myself a scientist anymore for a long. But I would love to see science somehow embedded into decision making. Maybe not in its entirety, but at least take some of the elements of real science and embed them into decision making and policy. So again, if this project can help to make that happen and weave in the science, the natural capital, the economic arguments into policy, I think that will be another great win. So yeah, those are the 2 or 3 things that I look for.
Vivek, 1 or 2 sentences?
Yeah. I just wanted to talk about 3 main things. One is, I think, adding on to what Aaron had said about quantifying the benefits of, let's say, mangrove conservation. We did this thing with our global team on basically quantifying the benefits of adaptation and resilience projects. So what we did was we looked at 235 odd projects across 13 countries, all funded by bilateral projects or private sector, World Bank, MDBs and all of that. And it is sort of spanning across multiple sectors, water, infrastructure, energy, agriculture and all of that. And we basically wanted to quantify it across 3 dividends. What we call as avoided losses is what you talked about, is if a coastal area was to flood, what is the money that a state government has to pump in to make sure that the livelihoods and the biodiversity is restored. So we call them as avoided losses. The second one was on socio-economic benefits. How does mangrove conservation actually lead to livelihoods, be it like through reducing erosion or whatever it could be? How does it actually lead to socio-economic benefits of the communities which are dependent or in the periphery of that? And the third one is on quantifying environmental benefits, which is often very scarce because we don't have enough data points to actually quantify that. So we made an attempt around that, but not to say that mangroves was a center stage of that, but across some of these projects that we analyzed, mangroves were a byproduct. And we sort of did a bit of a quantification of how they do benefit communities in countries like India, backward, the global south basically. How does it actually benefit them across these 3 dividends? And that's basically creating a business case for why a government or a private sector should be investing in adaptation, including, in this case, mangrove conservation. We do have some sample evidence around that. The second thing which I think is very important is in urban areas especially is that there's complex jurisdiction in general. So if in a city like Chennai, if you're looking at mangrove conservation, it's not just the forest department, but it's also the city, the JCC, which is Greater Chennai Corporation. You have various departments all working in silos and never talk to each other, and getting them to make sure that their agenda actually overlaps is a very big task. So I think that's where we need to look at is how do you include blue-green infrastructure planning into the master plans of cities? I think that's something that some cities are doing now, but I think a greater emphasis and momentum is required for that. The third thing is just a bit of an anecdotal sort of experience that I wanted to share. Because when we, as part of a previous project, we had gone to Fiji, one of the Pacific islands, for some meetings, and where we had actually gone to a very remote island in the sea, and that island was just home to a few, maybe hundreds of people, and every year the storm surges and floods actually led to houses close to the water being lifted and thrown into the mainland, the main part of the island. So people that actually realized that we need to do something, and that's where they came to mangroves. And we actually saw mangroves being planted in the fringes of the village, which actually led to the reduction in the tidal movement and made sure that the houses had closer in the higher altitudes didn't get affected by it. And they were also exploring insurance mechanisms to make sure that that can fund the NBS that they were looking to implement. I think that's a fantastic example. It's obviously easier to implement that in places like Fiji, which are small islands, but in countries like India, it's going to be very complex. But I think we don't have to wait till we get hit by such storm surges every year, but actually think about it more proactively. So that's just something I wanted to share. Yeah, thanks.
Tariq?
Yeah, I think everything's been said. But I think from our perspective, what we see as a vision would be really to kind of redefine infrastructure, to include also the blue and green aspects in addition to the gray, and really bring what is on the fringes today in terms of conservation really more to the center, and in that how do we really engage and reach out to people? I think that is a big aspect of it. But also, how do we have a holistic and nuanced discussion with policymakers? Because often, there'll be one aspect of a research that will be shared. So the idea of this coalition is really to bring a very holistic picture, trying to study all of the aspects, and also not to have a fortress style approach to conservation, because frankly that's not sustainable. But how do we really have it in a nuanced way, but also at the same time taking into consideration the value of old forests? Because today, and you touched upon it as well, this whole idea that we can compensate and we can replant, which is important. But the value of mature plantations in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of the ecosystem that they create underwater and above water, is also discounted when we have programs of this nature. So how do we really bring, again, to center stage the value of these mature plantations and the few that we have, the importance of ensuring that we're able to conserve them? And I think the whole global aspect, which, has been touched upon, but how do we leverage many things happening in the global ecosystem, whether it's finance, whether it's approaches to technology, whether it's approaches to communication, or even strategy? How do we really dovetail those global movements to the Indian context, make it relevant? And importantly, how do we enhance capacity, and how do we train our folks in India to be able to do this work independently? I think that's really the vision for this.
So fantastic. Thank you very much. Again, thank you. It's been an honor to host this conversation at Connect Karo. Thank you all for the wonderful conversation, and hopefully, wishing all of us lots of success on this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.